Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Comm Center podcast. My name is Rosanna, and I'll be your host today. This podcast is here to give you facts and tips on how to thrive here at San Jose State University. Today, we bring a very special guest to our podcast. She is a beloved part of San Jose State University's faculty and has been here since 1998. I'm pretty sure you took a class of hers as a communications major. Have you guessed who it is yet? It is the one, the only, Dr. Rona Halualani. Hello, Dr. Halualani. Thanks for taking the time to speak to us. It is such an honor for me to be interviewing you today. You are a legend in the field of intercultural communications. Can you please give us a little insight on your most recent achievements? And for anyone who hasn't taken your class yet, tell us a little bit about what you do.
Oh my goodness, what a lovely introduction. You're just the best. Oh, much love to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I love you all. Comm Studies rocks. I am Dr. Rona Halualani, or Rona. I'm an intercultural communication professor. So I study things with regard to how we identify through cultures, how do cultures
Hmm.
interact,
Hmm.
larger issues related to cultures. And I think when you're asking about my most latest achievement, there is a handbook that I edited with a really well-known intercultural communication scholar who's my advisor, Dr. Thomas Nakayama. He and I put together a collection of essays in a handbook of critical intercultural
Hmm.
communication. And so there's actually a couple of the professors in our department in communication studies that are actually featured in this handbook as well. So
Wow.
yeah. So this is the handbook related to that. Critical intercultural communication relates to the perspective of looking at culture and communication, but also looking at it through issues of like historical context and power and whatnot.
Wow, that's great. Um, could you tell us a little bit about Halualani and Associates and what inspired you to create that project? What were the goals and principles for
Oh,
that?
I love that. Thank you. I don't get to, I have like these different worlds, one foot in one world in the other. So Halualani and Associates is a very, very small consulting firm that I created with my brother. Shout out to Roger
Oh,
Halualani. I have two brothers, and he's my most immediate kind of older brother. And I was an administrator, Rosanna and listeners, a long time ago at San Jose State University, where I worked directly for the president of the university, and I was in charge of diversity. Actually, I was he was the president of the university, excuse me, and I was reporting to him, and I was in charge of diversity and inclusion and inclusive excellence, and was tasked to lead the campus in creating the first diversity strategic plan in the CSU system. And with that, there were a number of things that I did with regard to diversity, equity, inclusion because of my intercultural communication background that I started to get other campuses that says, hey, what you all did over there and this mapping. I created a process called diversity mapping. Can you do that for our campus? And then organizations would reach out to me. And so I thought, okay, in my spare time, other than being a professor, which is my true love, I love doing that forever. I started to get asked about if I could do some of the diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting practices for campuses outside of San Jose State, even
wow.
city governments and whatnot. So I fell into it, Rosanna. I fell into it. It
Wow.
wasn't something I sought out because my dream job is this one, is being with all of you. And
Oh,
seriously, that's my dream. I get to live this dream. And then so that consulting firm I started in about 2008, 2009. I would only do it like in my spare time on the weekends or vacations, but from that I've worked with over 53 campuses.
wow.
I worked with a healthcare system in Indiana and 14, 15 years. I still do it from time to time. And you know what's great for our comm studies majors and minors and listeners is that it allows me to do all the things that we talk about in theory, intercultural communication theory, and
Mm-hmm.
it allows me to apply it, and then I can bring that knowledge back to you all. I want to eventually create a course in intercultural communication consulting,
Wow.
which would be amazing for all of
Mm-hmm.
you because
Yes.
you all could do all this. But that's
Yes.
what that's about. Yeah.
Wow. That is so inspirational. That is great. Okay, so we have a few questions about intercultural communications that might help some students who haven't taken your class yet. For instance, how does one define their cultural identity?
Mm.
And what terms limit or allow how we determine cultural identity?
Oh my goodness.
That's a lot.
You cut to the core of the very best questions. Oh my goodness. I love it.
Thank you.
Spoken like a true communication studies scholar. So for
Thank you.
me, that could be a whole course, and that whole notion of how do we identify with certain cultures, and then
Hmm.
how do other cultures and society identifies us, which can be answered very, very differently.
Right.
I'm mixed, so I'm Japanese, Hawaiian, I'm also European American. And so oftentimes I think we think that we are only part of the cultures that claim us, right? That if your parents or your guardians say you belong to this, right?
Hmm.
But
Yes.
oftentimes many of us don't get that. Maybe our family members had a very different relationship to their culture. Maybe they had emigrated, and it was really tricky to emigrate into a certain country, and they were not allowed to be so free
Hmm.
flowing with their culture, right? All those
Hmm.
things affect how not just they identify, but how you identify. And for me, I feel like it's something related, obviously, to your past and your family's past, and that there's a a belonging, there's an initial link that could be related to how you identify as culture. And I think over time that changes.
Wow.
You may not speak Spanish and yet are Latino, Latinx, and feel so distant from your culture, but I still see you as a member of that culture. Now, your relationship to that culture might be distant, but it's just never too late. I'm an optimist, Rosanna. I believe we all have a cultural background. I believe we all have a sense of belonging. I believe that changes over time. And I believe that we can and should share with each other in different ways
Right.
our cultures, while also knowing that there are complications like power issues and historical memories and things like that. But I those that's what we try to do in our classes. Is I always tell everybody, you don't come in here without a culture. We are just going to try to see how we can, establish and facilitate you meeting up with your culture, you finding out about your culture, you being a little bit more analytical about your culture,
Hmm.
and you finding out about everybody else's culture.
Right.
That's the goal of
Right.
of our courses. So
So powerful. Right.
yeah.
Okay. So talking about other cultures can be confusing for some people. Is it ethical to speak about other cultures?
Mm.
How can we represent our cultural identity without speaking for others?
Oh my goodness. You are like living in my brain. Um, that is a question I struggle with every day. I don't think that there's any easy answers
Right.
about, my whole thing is when people said, I know my culture, I know this, I know that. I even think with your own culture. So I'm mainland Hawaiian. I was born and raised in San Mateo, California. I never tell
Hmm.
anybody otherwise. But people see my last name and they just assume, what island, or I was just on your island, or this or that. And I'm
Yeah.
always really clear.
Hmm.
I'm diasporic and whatnot. And so even for myself, the way I frame how I'm connected to my Hawaiianness, I'm really careful because I also want to make sure that, sometimes what I say doesn't match up with how people think about Hawaiians. And aren't they always in Hawaii? And what are you doing here? Right? Are you
Right.
betraying your background? Any of those things. And I think that no matter what your relationship is to your culture, there is always a sense of responsibility that we carry with, because I could very well be, you could very well be the only cultural member that someone else has access to, right?
Right.
So the
Right.
way you speak about it, even though I qualify and say, well, I'm different than my dad. My dad was born and raised on a Hawaiian homestead, very, very
Right.
different from me. So I think that the responsibility, I like that question better than ethics. Ethics for sure, but sometimes when we think ethics, we think it's one way of doing right, one way of doing wrong.
Hmm.
And I just think that oftentimes we just need to be responsible and aware of how we speak, and not just about our own cultures, but about
Hmm.
other cultures. And I do think that changes depending on who you're talking to. If I'm talking to somebody at Starbucks,
Hmm.
because I'm very friendly. I'm too friendly. Versus if I'm talking to all of you all in my classes or if I'm at a conference. So I feel like we always will carry the weight of responsibility. But you know what's cool about that, Rosanna, is
What?
that it requires us to keep talking to people and
Yes.
keep elaborating. And that's what it is for me is I just want to talk to people about culture
Right.
at the end of the day, right? So
Absolutely.
that's kind of how I see about speaking for others. But we do talk about this issue in all of our classes in comm, and
Mhm.
I look forward to talking about that with you and the listeners, all of us, in a variety of venues. Yeah.
Nice. Great. Thank you. So, leaning into intercultural communication as a whole, how
Mhm.
does, and you spoke about this, you touched on this a little bit earlier. How does power impact intercultural communication? And can intercultural interactions occur without influence of power?
Love it. Love it again. These star gold questions. For me, in terms of how I see the world, I don't think there is a space, out in the world where power isn't at least present. Now, that could be in a variety of ways.
Right.
I think when we think power, we think this person has supreme authority over me. And you may not see the world like that. You may really see,
Hmm.
like, I don't see it like that, Rona. I think we're all people and I think we all have freedom to move. I just think that even depending on where you live, for example,
Hmm.
think about what types of cultures were you exposed to in your schools, in your community? That's not by accident. In many ways, it's not a grand design, but in many
Hmm.
ways, it's based on socioeconomic income. It's based on who was allowed to maybe be in the state or in the country at the time in terms of immigration. What cultural access do we have? What kind of school was it? Was it public?
Hmm.
Was it private? That also, culture for me is always based on socioeconomic class. And all of those things relate to economic power, historical power, even the groups that you don't interact with. Think about that. Even the groups that we don't have access to, that's not by coincidence. That's not by chance. That's also because, again, are those people allowed access to that particular area, to that particular socioeconomic class, to that particular industry? Silicon Valley, for example,
Hmm.
it's so expensive to live here, right? Does
Right.
that
Right.
also shape, right,
Right.
who we interact with and who we don't? And even just the other thing, when I was younger, and I love my family, but oftentimes in families, they would tell you, you are allowed to date these people, you are not allowed to date these people. And I was like, I thought that was so strange,
Wow.
especially as a woman, a young girl hearing that.
Right.
And just the ways in which we even formulate who our friends could be, who our romantic partners could be. So you may not consciously think you're following those rules, but you might subconsciously be naturally avoiding people. You might not be in direct contact or access. It might not even be a possibility. I don't think that that was the case for me, but even stories that we tell one another are kind of riddled with some aspect of power that can affect who we interact with. So, and I also want to be clear too, Roseanne, even though I see power as being a part of intercultural communication, it
Hmm.
doesn't mean I'm a pessimist. It doesn't mean I don't
Right.
think there's ability to change and for us to really help each other through these hurdles and obstacles. No, no, no. I'm the most optimistic, but
Right.
I'd rather understand what I'm dealing with,
Hmm.
power wise, to really be able to make true connections with people, to really help people, to really make to ally and advocate for groups that aren't there and whatnot. So that's kind of how I see it. That's a long answer to
Yeah.
your question.
Yeah. No, it kind of reminds me of the critical paradigm.
Yep.
That right? It reminds me of that. I just,
Yep.
'cause I had the
Exactly.
class with you, so it totally
you
reminds me.
you have the
Like,
dosage of Rona. Yes. And that's what I mean by critical intercultural communication. And
yes.
it looks at power, but it also looks
Hmm.
at agency and change and what we can do within the world that we live in and those kinds of things.
Yes. Love it. What inspired you to write the handbook of critical intercultural communications? Could you give us a rundown of what it's about?
Sure, I would love to.
Thank you.
So this is a handbook that has, oh my goodness, just these amazing essays and chapters by communication studies scholars, intercultural rhetorical scholars, our own Dr. Kristen Cole, our own Dr. Kathleen McConnell, shout out, our own Dr. Deanna Fassett, our own Dr. Priya Raman, are all featured in this handbook amongst many others. There's about 45 contributions in addition to some pieces that Dr. Tom Nakayama and I write. And everybody is looking at intercultural communication or an aspect of intercultural communication through a critical, or like you said, critical paradigm, through a power-based focus, but they're looking at things in terms of identity, in terms of, what does a critical intercultural perspective look like when we're thinking about Japan? What does it look like when we're thinking about trans identities? What does it look like when we're thinking about race and ethnicity? And it's just a real treat to see these just fantastic scholars. And it's this collection. And I did a previous edition of it in 2010, 2011 with Dr. Nakayama, and we featured other chapters and whatnot. And the inspiration behind it was, how do we get this, these amazing topics, this amazing focus on critical intercultural communication? How do we get these essays together to feature it to our students, but to feature it to kind of the world and to give a very different perspective of how we look at culture? And so that was kind of the spirit behind it.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. The Handbook of Intercultural Communication is free to read and can be found on the Wiley Online Library. It's very informative and should be read by everyone. So tell me, Dr. Halualani, have you already started thinking about what's going to be your next project, research project?
Always. So and as you said, the Handbook of Critical Intercultural Communication. If people have trouble accessing or whatnot, please reach out to me and I can share. Aspects of it and whatever you need. But yes, I'm always, like you all are writing papers and all these darn assignments we always give you. Us professors are always trying to think of the next project. So I am currently writing some pieces about diversity. I actually have been studying a lot more about legal policy and lawsuit cases related to
Okay.
intercultural communication. And so I just wrote
Okay.
a piece. You all know San Francisco. And so there's a school called Lowell High School in San Francisco. And there's a big brouhaha about which cultural groups have access to that school. And there was a legal case called Ho versus San Francisco City Unified School District. I just finished a piece where I analyzed that legal case.
Wow.
And I talk about it in terms of all these things we've talked about here on this podcast episode. And then I'm actually finishing a book. It's taken me many, many years. This is another one of my books. And I'm writing about what it means to be a diasporic Hawaiian. And so talking
Wow.
about what does that mean and what are the complications of
Mm-hmm.
I'm Hawaiian but off island, and does this complicate like the Hawaiian sovereignty movement? So I'm writing a book. It's been a forever project, and I hope to finish that in a couple of years. But I usually try to write 3 or 4 things at a time.
Okay.
So those are kind of some of the things I'm thinking about. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you again for taking the time to be on the Comm Center's podcast. I hope this gave some insights to students of San Jose State University and inspires everyone to be a little more mindful. I definitely recommend everyone listening to take her class if you can. Intercultural communications is so important and interesting to learn about. To wrap it up, do you have any tips for students maybe struggling to find their own cultural identity?
Oh, I love that. I think that taking a class in intercultural communication or cultural identity is one start, because you're all collectively together trying to do the same thing or trying to think about your culture differently. And that's just it's like a community effort, right? We're all going to try to think about this together. You're not alone.
Right.
I also think, if you're curious about your culture or cultures in general, seeking out things with regard to books or there's a lot of really wonderful, actually identity-based groups that are on campus and cultural events. And some of them are virtual if you can't make it to campus all the time. And then the last thing is reach out to me. I would love to talk to you, and I would love anybody, even if you can't take one of my classes or don't want to, sad, but reach out to me and reach out to several others because we have resources that we can share and really interesting, engaging ways for you safely to find out more and to kind of explore aspects of who you are. Yeah.
Yes, yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Halualani. I've taken a couple of your classes, love them, learned so
Mm.
much. We appreciate all you do for San Jose State University. Good luck on your future endeavors. Again, my name is Rosanna, signing off from the Com Center podcast. Thank you and have a great day.